I think the seeds for Survived and Punished were probably planted during the Free Marissa Alexander campaign. And it was in 2015 when the Free Marissa Alexander campaign and CAFMA, Chicago Alliance to Free Marissa Alexander, now known as Love and Protect, they put on a workshop at the Insight Color of Violence conference in Chicago. So in 2015, that was also when we were doing a defense campaign in California, a deportation defense campaign for a survivor named Nanhee Jo, who is an undocumented Korean single mom who was being prosecuted for child abduction after she fled her abusive ex-partner, who was also the father of her child, who then reported her to the authorities for kidnapping. So she was, she was held in pretrial detention. She was denied bail as a flight risk, and she was also facing deportation if she was convicted, and she was convicted eventually. So myself and some other organizers in California, we had been working on this campaign, and I think we had looked a lot to the Free Marissa Alexander campaign as a precedent and as kind of a model for organizing a successful defense campaign, one that held on to its principles and values, but was also able to, make some changes in the mainstream, and or in the way that it was reported in the mainstream. So when CAFMA and Free Marissa now did this workshop at Insight, of course I went because I was like, we need help, and it just felt important to connect with other people doing this kind of work, because I think often the issues of abuse and intimate partner violence, of gender violence, they often don't get discussed together with the prison industrial complex or our systems of policing and criminalization in the United States. So we connected there, and as we continued to talk and build friendships and exchange stories, I think we started to see how many parallels and similarities there were across our organizing experiences and in these stories, and in many of the stories that we were hearing just from around the country of criminalized survivors, largely women of color. And so as we were talking, we were kind of sharing like lessons learned, and I was asking for a lot of advice here and there, like how did you deal with the attorneys? How did you deal with, having more radical politics when you're trying to fight something within the parameters of the legal system because you're trying to get someone out. So I think after the campaign ended was when Survived and Punished really started kind of coming together with Love and Protect, Free Marissa Now, and Stand With Nanhee, and then the California Coalition of Women Prisoners. So one of the first ideas that we actually had was a toolkit. So a toolkit for organizers or advocates on supporting a criminalized survivor and doing something like a defense campaign. So it's been a little while since then. We're in 2017. It's June something, and it felt like a good time to come together nationally to think about where we go from here together. And I think with defense campaigns, there's just so many of them, and there's so many survivors who are in need of this kind of support that I think it's very obvious that that the issue and the problem, like the magnitude, is not one that can be done. It can't be dealt with on its own. Like resolving one case or getting one person free doesn't actually solve the problem. That this is a systemic thing, and many people across the country are being impacted, and upwards of 60 to 80-90% of populations in some women's prisons are survivors, identify as survivors of physical abuse, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. So even in the short time that Survived and Punished has been around, maybe like a year and a half or so, we have heard a lot of stories that are very similar to each other and very disturbing in their parallels. So I think particularly in this moment where we're being faced with an extremely oppressive government, like a really oppressive administration right now with the Trump administration, it feels more important than ever to kind of come together and share our strengths and support one another. And I think we believe in the power of local autonomous organizing, and we also believe in the power of building solidarity and just being in touch with each other, because this is so much bigger than just our cities, and this is so much bigger than just us as individual organizers or individual survivors. So that's kind of why why we planned this convening at AMC this year. So what we did today was we started the morning by hearing stories of hearing from directly impacted survivors, from Nunhee Jo, from Marissa Alexander, from Sherelle Baldwin, and Bella Robinson. And they were all just super amazing. I think really just helped to kind of ground us in, why we're here today and why we do the work, why we're here. And so throughout the rest of the day, we took the time to just get into groups and just talk with each other, because it's really special that we actually get to come together and get to strategize and have this time with each other. So people had groups to talk about organizing around immigration and immigration enforcement, and that being a part of the prison industrial complex. We had a breakout group to talk about alternatives to criminalization, so transformative justice, restorative justice. We had a group to talk about organizing in the domestic violence and sexual assault fields, which often tend to struggle to figure out how to support criminalized survivors because of their constraints as nonprofits and agencies that receive government funding and agencies that might have ties to district attorneys and prosecutors. And we had another group to talk about the criminalization of sex work, another to talk about the criminalization of trans people. And I hope I'm not forgetting any. But so we had these groups to kind of get to talk more about challenges that we're facing in this moment and in this era of a lot of white supremacy and just the right wing building a lot of power. We had a chance to talk about what has changed with this current political moment, and actually what hasn't changed, what is still the same, and what has been heightened. So I think it was a good opportunity for us to be able to think about how we adapt in this moment and how we make good observations in this moment, while also noting that this is not new and this is also part of a larger trajectory in which women of color, black women, trans people, etc., have been targeted by the criminal legal system for as long as this country has been around. So, and then after we had a couple of rounds of those groups, and then we shared our toolkit, which we finally made. It was a collaborative project between Survived and Punished and Love and Protect. So that toolkit is basically a guide for organizers on how to run defense campaigns, and it's like the hard-earned lessons that we learned. So it feels really good to share that, and so it has things like, how do you navigate talking to attorneys, and how do you write supportive letters to someone who's inside? How do you provide emotional support for a survivor who's criminalized? How do you, what are some special things you might want to consider if the survivor is an immigrant and undocumented, or if they're trans? So the toolkit contains all those kinds of things, and we're really excited to share it. And one big reason we also wanted to do this convening was to actually share the toolkit. So after our breakouts, we shared the toolkit and kind of explained what it was and why we had it, and also just took a moment to think about what kinds of ideas people have in the room and where we can, how we can move forward together. So we had a chance to brainstorm and kind of talk about those things together before we wrapped up. But I think again, in that closing session, we wanted to emphasize, we are all doing the work where we can and where it is important and accessible for us, in our own regions and cities, and also just how important it feels now more than ever to really come together, or else we're not going to make it, So I think in this time of really high uncertainty and a lot of escalation, there's also a lot of opportunity and a lot of room to grow and to also, fight for what we believe in and what we actually want, which is not just little concessions here and there, but eventual, a whole different kind of world and a whole different way of how we deal with violence in the society, and how we think about violence and how we actually support survivors in our own communities to be safer and more liberatory spaces for all of us.